Welcome to part 4 of this course. I really hope you're enjoying it so far. And as usual, let's start with the quote of the day. This time it is have a bias towards action. Let's see something happen now. So the whole point of this is that we need to fight with our procrastination because otherwise we are going to be just talkers rather than doers, and we don't really want that. So the first formula today is the hyperlink formula. This is a very useful formula again. It stores a link under a specified name and opens it upon, let's say, clicking that name, for example. The way the formula is structured, you need to have, obviously, the link location, and after that a friendly name. I've put that obviously in squared brackets because this is an optional thing really. So let me show you an example of this by going to the spreadsheet. So this is the link that I've got here, okay, and I want to put this as a hyperlink. So hyperlink is going to be this, and I need to select this, okay, and the friendly name is going to be Google, okay. So now okay, I'm using the comma instead of the semicolon again. Okay, so this is what we have. Now if I press here, it will open Google, okay. So let's see what happens. Right, so here we go, and we have Google here. Okay, so going back to the presentation again, the next two formulas that we have are column and columns. So column will return the column number of a reference cell, but it is going to start the counting from the very first column, or obviously that is going to be column A, okay. Whereas the columns formula, it returns the number of columns within a specific array. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by that as well. Let me just go to the spreadsheet again. Okay, now if I go to the second example, this example here for these two formulas. Okay, now if I use column, let's say of this cell, okay, we will have column. It will give us 8. Okay, it basically means that column H is actually number 8, you know, starting from, let's say, column A. So let me just double check that as well. That's column 1, that's column 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so then it is showing us a correct value here. Okay, now the columns formula, what we need is, for example, let's say this is our array, okay. So now we have an array of 2 columns, as you can see, column H and column I, okay. We have not selected the whole columns, but we have, like, you know, at least one cell from both columns, okay. So now when I close the bracket and press enter, it's going to give me 2, which basically means that I have 2 different columns within the array that I have selected in this formula, okay. Now let me go back again and show you obviously 2 very similar formulas again, but this time for row and rows, okay. So again the same logic actually follows here as well. So if I go to the example, this is our example spreadsheet. This is what we're gonna have, okay. So as you can see, the row of cell of obviously L3 is actually 3, right? Because obviously you have column row 1, row 2, row 3. Okay. Now if I go and type in the rows formula and select our array here, you're gonna see that we have 2 rows, okay, and that's why the result, the outcome of the formula is actually 2 as well. Okay, so going back to the presentation now, I want to show you a few formulas that identify, let's say, errors, and based on what error is actually identified, it returns true or false. Okay, IsNA is a formula that returns true if there is an NA error in obviously in Excel. Okay, otherwise it returns false, and all we need to do is actually just select a cell or a value. Okay, and then IsErr is basically like is similar to the IsError, which we'll be discussing further in this course. Okay, but it returns true if there is an error different than the NA error. Okay, otherwise it returns false, and let me give you the examples to make this more clear, of course. So the example for these two formulas is actually here. Okay, so what we have here is, if I use IsNA for this one here, is going to return true, because this is how the NA formula, the NA error actually looks like. This here is not the correct NA error, because the slash here is actually, it is a backwards slash, it is not the forward slash. Okay, so if I type in the same formula again, okay, and select this cell, it is going to return false, right? Okay, so let me show you now the IsErr formula. So as you can see, even from the description here, it says checks whether a value is an error excluding NA. Okay, so this, if I select this, it is going to return true, because there is actually an error. Okay, and this error is actually division by 0. Okay, that is different than NA, and that's why it returns true. Okay, but if I try now the IsErr formula on an NA error, it returns false. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation and see what's next. So IsEven and IsOdd. Okay, so this is specifically for cells or a range of cells, and we want to check whether the values there are actually even numbers or odd numbers. Okay, and the structure of the two formulas is very simple, of course. And to show you an example of this, I have obviously just created this table here. Okay, and we have an array. The array is here, or the range, and we want to see which ones obviously let's say even numbers here. We are going to start with that. Okay, so we check whether 10 is even. Is it even? It is even. Okay, so now we paste that for all the other cells as well here. Okay, so 7 is an odd number, that's why it returns false. 2, 8 and 6 are obviously even, 1 is odd. Okay, so let me now delete this and try the IsOdd formula. Okay, IsOdd, and 10 is obviously an even number, it's not odd, that's why it returns false. But if we go and paste the formula down as well, we can see that 7 is actually has a value of true, because 7 is an odd number. Same for 1 as well, whereas 2, 8 and 6 are actually false, as they're not actually odd numbers. Okay, so the next two formulas IsNumber and IsFormula. Okay, so the IsNumber checks whether let's say a specific cell or value within that cell is a number, and it returns true if it is, and if it's not, it returns false. IsFormula, it kind of like does a pretty similar thing really, but it checks whether let's say the specified cell actually has a formula within it. Okay, and returns true if it's obviously a formula, false in all other cases. The example is again here. So let's start with IsNumber. Okay, so this is a number, and I can just go and do all these different things. Just to drag down the formula or paste it down. Okay, so you can see we have true for the first three and then false for the next three. Okay, because obviously the last three actually not numbers. So let's try and check now the IsFormula for the same range of values really. Okay, so it returns false for obviously the first case, because as you can see here we don't really have a formula. Okay, but you can see here it has a value of true. Why is that? Because this is actually a sum. The sum of J12 and J13, okay, is actually 8. Okay, so that's why obviously it returns true, and then it returns true here as well, because there is actually a formula. As you can see, this is the formula, and the other two cases are actually false, because one of them is obviously a name, it's purely text. The other one again is like an error, but there's no formula behind it. Okay, now the next two formulas are IsText and IsNonText. I think that obviously you can guess like what they actually do without even reading the explanations. They're very simple formulas, but at the same time very useful as well at times when you have to perform specific analysis. IsText returns true if the specified value is actually text. If it's not text, it's going to return false. The IsNonText does exactly the opposite. It returns true if it's not, if the specified value is not a text, and obviously false in all other cases. Okay, so the example is here. Okay, so we can just go and check IsText. So IsText, it returns true for the first one. And you can see Tim is obviously, that's text really, okay, and that's a name, so that's why it's true. False in all other cases besides the last one, okay, because there's nothing that is actually just purely text. Okay, as you can see, this is actually like a type of error really. There's a formula behind it as well. Okay, so the IsNonText is going to do exactly the opposite now. Non-text. Okay, now we have this, and if I just go and paste it everywhere for this range, we can see that it basically did exactly the opposite of what the IsText outcomes were. Okay, now the next two formulas are IsBlank and not. IsBlank basically checks again another logical function, and it checks whether the specified cell has anything in it or it is empty. If it is empty, it's going to return true. If it's not empty, it's going to return false. Not basically, it changes the result of a logical operation from, let's say, true to false or false to true. I'll show you an example of that as well. Okay, so going back to this thing here, we have obviously the spreadsheet, and the IsBlank example is here. Okay, so now if I just go and check whether the cells in obviously the range on the left, this range here, if any of them are obviously blank, it's going to return true. So the first one is true because obviously cell C20 is blank, cell C23 is blank as well, so that's why you have true there as well. But the other two cases are false. Okay, now what we can do is we can just put not, so that you can see how not works here as well. So not will pretty much do the opposite really. So as you can see, now we have the opposite of what we had before. Okay, great. Back to the presentation. The next two formulas are Islogical and IsRef. Okay, Islogical is a formula that purely checks whether, let's say, there is a logical operation within the brackets. It returns true if there is, returns false if there isn't. The IsRef formula checks whether a value is a reference or not, and obviously returns true if it is, false if it's not. The examples here again. So let me show you. First of all, Islogical, for example. Okay, Islogical. So we need, let's say, this here. So as you can see, there is an operation inside. It is a logical operation. Okay, it should obviously 4 is not equal to 5. Okay, but because there is an operation, there is a logical operation within the brackets, it will return true. Okay, and then the IsRef, for example, is going to return true if you go and refer to a specific, let's say, cell, as in this case. But if you do this, for example, let's say apples, sorry, okay, so apples, it is going to return false. Right, I hope that you got you know, the logic behind these two formulas. They're quite simple, of course, and quite useful at the same time. Now back to the presentation. We have another formula here, which is IsError. So IsError is obviously a formula that is quite similar to the IsErr formula that we already discussed, but in the difference between the IsErr and the IsError formula is that the IsError formula will return true even if there is an NA error. So that's why the explanation here specifies any kind of an error. Okay, the structure of the formula is obviously all we need to do is just put the value or obviously like the cell, specified cell there within the brackets. So just to give you the example here as well, let's see. So okay. Okay, so it seems like the example is not here, but we can easily create one, for example. Okay, now we can go back to the IsErr where that was and just check, for example, how this works. Okay, now here's what we have. We have the IsErr. Okay, the IsErr returns true on this because obviously the division by 0 is not an NA error. Okay, but returns false here. Okay, because this is the NA error. But now if we do IsError just next to it, what we can do is just go and compare, for example. Okay, now this is what we are going to do. Now, as you can see, this is what makes the difference. What is the difference? What is the main difference between the two formulas? The NA formula. Okay. Now, back to the presentation. I want to thank you for your attention today, and this is obviously the end of this part. And again, I want to leave you with the quote, repetition is the mother of learning, because I want to emphasize on how important it is to just keep repeating something until it is actually obviously remembered in your head as much as possible, really. And I'll see you in the next part of this course.